This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Rada, for the very gracious introduction. Thank you. Mrs. Rada had to call me many times until she got a hold of me, and I agreed to do it, so I'm very grateful for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, Mrs. Reichman, for hosting tonight's event, and we'd like to dedicate tonight's learning, Lili Nishmas, Mrs. Reichman's mother. She mentioned to me that we're Kemat Mishpacha because her grandson and my son are in the same class. So we wish her on this occasion, her mother's Neshama Nasara Esther Bashmol Shem Naliyah, Shul Me'el Tzoyisha for her Mishpacha, Abi Askoel Tzedek. So in the early days of the state of Israel, so the entire Yemenite community was airlifted to Eretz Yisrael, and many of them had sort of outrageous claims that they were extremely old. Some of them claimed to be 120 years old, some of them 130, some of them 140, some even claimed to be as much as 150 years old, and there were no records, and there was no way to authenticate it. So that's how old they were. So the story goes that a guy goes into an insurance agency office, and he wants to buy a policy. And the lady behind the counter looks at him. He says, can I buy a policy, please? She says, how old are you? He says, I'm 79 years old. She says, 79 years old, I'm sorry, we can't sell you a policy. You look good for your age, but you're too old to buy a policy. He said, that's impossible. Last week, my father came in to buy a policy. You sold him a policy. Why can't you sell me a policy? So she said, what are you talking about? Your father bought a policy. How old is your father? My father is 98 years old. And we sold him a policy? So she goes to the records, she looks up the records, and sure enough, the guy passed the physical, he was in impeccable shape, and they sold him a policy. So she says, you know what? Come in next Tuesday, and we're going to sell you a policy. You'll come in for the physical. So he said, next Tuesday? I can't come in next Tuesday. Why can't you come in next Tuesday? I have a chasana next Tuesday. Who's chasana? My grandfather. He said, your grandfather? How old is your grandfather? My grandfather, 129. She said, your grandfather's 129. He's first getting married? No, it's not him. His parents are forcing him into it. By the way, I'm not really that funny. I'm a rabbi of a shul. And when I started off in the Rabbana, so my father is a professional speaker. I called up my father to tell him over the drasha. And of course, every drasha has to have a good joke. He says, Donnie, stick to the Divrei Torah. But everybody's looking for the secret for a long, happy, successful life. Everybody wants to know, what's the magical elixir to live a long life? Omega fish oil, flaxseed, exercise, things that taste terrible. What is the secret to live a long life? And of course we know, David HaMelech says, who desires, Chayim refers to Olam Haba, but Oyev Yomim L'Rois Tov, who wants to have a good, happy, healthy life, Netzar L'Shayin Chamera. Guard your tongue. Everybody knows that. We don't want to hear about it anymore. We've heard it so many times. This is the most abused concept. Every lecture, every shiur, every pilpul we go to, don't speak Lashon Hara, don't speak Lashon Hara. If you want to live long, don't speak Lashon Hara. But why? Why is Lashon Hara the key to long life? There are a lot of mitzvahs in the Torah. They're all important. We could pick any mitzvah and say, okay, observe this mitzvah, be careful in this particular mitzvah, and you'll live long. Why specifically Lashon Hara? So I want to share with you something very interesting. We know the Chafetz Chaim himself lived a very long life. In fact, when the Chafetz Chaim turned 90 years old, he did something very uncharacteristic. He took out a full-page ad in the newspaper, and he advertised that he turned 90 years old. And the Talmidim said, well, this is really against your regular policy of modesty. Why would you want to publicize that you reach this old age? And the Chafetz Chaim said, my whole life I endeavored to teach the world that if you're careful about Lashon Hara, you're going to live long. Imagine what would have happened if I didn't make it to this age, or if I didn't make it to an old age. People would have said, nice try. You taught about Lashon Hara, and you taught about the importance of guarding your speech, but it didn't really work. So the Chafetz Chaim felt vindicated. He felt that by turning 90 years old, this sort of verified and gave credence to his whole life's mission. So I want to point out to you something that I found particularly fascinating. Chafetz Chaim wrote many Sfarim about Dibur. Sefer Chavetz Chaim, Sefer Shmir Salashon, Sefer Zachar L'Miriam, Sefer Tzvas Tamim, almost all the Svarim of the Chavetz Chaim are about speech. And I never understood why. I found one line in the writings of the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim writes, if you look on your sheet in number 3, the Chavetz Chaim says, Kemat kol yomai lo hisachti dati mil hisboinen oidois chelek hadibor b'chlalai. Practically, Chavetz Chaim says, my entire life, I did not let my mind wander from focusing on the phenomenon and the faculty of speech. In other words, the Chavetz Chaim was intrigued. He was fascinated by how speech works, how speech operates. This is something that took up the whole attention of the Chavetz Chaim. This is something that really captured his imagination. And we understand why the Chavetz Chaim dedicated himself to speak about and to focus on speech. So I want to tonight sort of revolutionize our perception of the faculty of speech. We all know we have it. We all know we could use it. But I want to sort of change the way we view our ability to speak. The Gemara tells us that the Rebbeinu Shalom has a conversation with the tongue. And the Rebbeinu Shalom contrasts the tongue to every other limb in the body. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, every limb in the body, now you could question this, but this is what the Gemara says. Every limb in the body is vertical. The Gemara says the heart is vertical, the lungs are vertical, the liver is vertical, the kidneys are vertical. There's only one organ in the body that's horizontal, and that's the tongue. Interesting. There's only one limb in the body that's horizontal. The Gemara continues. All the limbs in the body, this is what the Gemara says, are on the outside. The eyes are on the outside, the ears are on the outside. Mm-hmm. The nose is on the outside. The tongue is the only limb, the Gemara says, that's on the inside. And more than that, says the Gemara. Every other limb is just there, but the tongue has two guardians. The tongue has the teeth, and if the teeth are closed, it becomes very hard to speak. And if the lips are closed, you can't get a word out. And this is the conversation that God has with the tongue. 3 discrepancies, 3 differences between the tongue and every other limb. Says the Maral, this is to teach you how to view speech. We usually view speech, well, I have a mouth, and it's there to use. And if I'm sitting next to somebody, the worst crime in the world is awkward silence. That's like the biggest crime in the world. Somebody had the ridiculous idea that to determine if a husband and wife are compatible, they have to sit across the table and somehow make conversation as if that's going to happen again afterwards, right? Like you're going to be sitting there across the table conversing with each other for an hour. Says the Maral, this Gemara is teaching you that you have a tongue just in case you need it. Not to use. It's a weapon. If somebody has a gun, if somebody has a revolver, you don't walk around like that and ready to fire. The tongue is horizontal. What does horizontal mean? Horizontal means it's at rest, meaning it's there. You might need it. You might meet somebody that's a little bit downtrodden, that needs lifting of the spirits, that's in a bad mood, and then what you have to do is, hey, tongue, wake up from your horizontal position. And you have to get your teeth to open its doors and get your lips to open. In other words, the default position of the mouth is not to use it. It's there in case you need it. And that itself is sort of a revolutionary perspective of the mouth. It's there just in case you need it. It's very interesting. We know that the primary punishment for Lashon Hara, which we don't have today, even though the Chavetz Chaim does write, it's possible for a person to have tsaras on their neshama. And that has certain ramifications, could affect the person financially. But there's something called tsaras, that if somebody speaks Lashon Hara, they could contract tsaras. And what do we tell them at Tzaira? We say, Badad Yeshev Michutz Lamachana Mashavai. He has to be in solitude. Basically, we tell him that every other person who's tameh goes out of one camp. So let's say somebody contracts tumas meis, they leave what is called machana kuhuna. Somebody contracts a more severe tumah, they leave machana levia as well. And the most severe type of tumah is taras, where we tell them you have to leave all 3 machanais. What's the symbolism of telling the Mitzvah you need to leave all 3 machanais? So the explanation is as follows. The person has the tongue. The tongue is, so to speak, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's in the Holy of Holies. It's in the inner sanctum. This person decided to take the tongue, remove it from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, out of the Machana Kuhuna, through the teeth, through the Machana Leviyah, through the lips, through the Machana Yisrael, And he took his tongue and he moved it out of all three machanois inappropriately. So we say, you took the tongue and you inappropriately released it, allowed it to leave its chamber inappropriately, then your punishment is you need to go michutz legimel machanois, mida kenegen mida. It's very interesting. If you look in Sefer Shir HaShirim, which we know is an allegory, it's a song between a chassan and a kala, and it's a mashal, it's a malitza, it's an allegory, the love between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael. 2 times in Shir HaShirim, the chassan, which is God, compliments his kala, which is Klal Yisrael, about her teeth. It's very interesting. If you look in number 13, 2 seemingly identical psukim. 2 seemingly identical psukim. We have one pasuk that says, Shinayich ke'eder haketzuvais. Her teeth are like an established flock, sha'olu min harachza, that came out of the water, shekula masimois, they're all perfect, v'shakula ein bahem, nothing is missing. So the chassan God is praising Knesset Yisrael. He says, your teeth are beautiful, they're wholesome, they're pure, they're white, you have nice teeth, God says to Klal Yisrael. And then a few prakim later, we have almost an identical pasuk. Shinayich ke'eder harachelim. Your teeth are like a flock of rams. So in the first pasuk it's Shinayich ke'eder haketzuvais. And in the second pasuk it's Shinayich ke'eder harachelim. Sha'olu min harachza. Shekula masimois. V'shakula imhem. Practically an identical pasuk. So twice in Shir HaShirim, the Rebbeinu Shalom is praising the teeth of Klal Yisrael. So we have any dentists over here? Usually if I give a shir, like 90% of the people are dentists. But about the men, usually if you meet a dentist, you ask, what yeshiva did you go to, How many teeth does a Jew have? So what do you mean does a Jew have? All human beings have the same number of teeth. Not really, no. No, there's a Messiah that Akum have 33 teeth. I never counted. I never asked them to open up their mouth. But that's what the Messiah is. But a Yid, a Jew, has how many teeth? 32 teeth. 16 on the top, 16 on the bottom. Right? Keneged Lev, 32. What is the significance of 32 teeth? You see, if we understand the biology, the physiology of the construction of the mouth, we get a better understanding what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to do with the mouth. So we know, the first thing is first. The tongue is horizontal. Its default position is at rest. It's locked in. You have teeth. You have lips. 32 teeth. Why did the Rebbeinu Shalom give us 32 teeth? Says the Shla HaKadosh. It's to teach you that the mouth has 2 functions, 2 purposes, and that's it. Torah and Tefillah. So how do you see that in the teeth? Well, we know that the main learning is when we go to the shul, we hear the reading of the Torah. How many times a week do they read from the Torah? Well, they do Monday, Thursday, Shabbos morning, Shabbos by Mincha. 4 times. How many aliyahs on Monday? 3 aliyahs. How many aliyahs on Thursday? 3 aliyahs. How many aliyahs Shabbos morning? 7 aliyahs. How many aliyahs Shabbos morning? 3 aliyahs. 16 teeth. 16 aliyahs. The reason why the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us 16 top teeth to indicate the function of the mouth is to Torah. Now, part of Torah is chesed, to give a proper referral. When you give a medical referral, when you help somebody navigate the medical system, you're using your mouth, using your tongue, you're using your koyach hadibur for Torah, for chesed, to revitalize a yid. You're using one's mouth. One is using their mouth for the proper way. 16 top teeth. 16 bottom teeth. Tefillah. Why do we daven? Davening is keneged karbanos. How many karbanos are brought in the Beis HaMikdash every week? So we have the carbon tamid shel shachar, carbon tamid shel bein arbayim, twice a day. 2 times 7 is 14. But Shabbos, there are additional 2 karbanos, 2 musafin. There's 16 karbanos a week. That's why there's 16 bottom teeth. So that means, says the Shla HaKadosh, a person should think, what I'm about to say, is it Torah? Is it chesed? Is it tefillah? Otherwise, I don't want to use the expression. Don't say it. Don't say it. You weren't given a koyach hadibur for that. You see somebody that's down, you want to show friendship, you want to show ava, you want to show chiba, you want to show Kavod habriyos, that's all wonderful. You have 32 teeth, but make a cheshbon. Is what I'm about to say under the rubric of why the Rebbeinu Shalom gave me the koyach hadibur? So that's a tough criteria. That's a very tough criteria. I want to bring out another nakuda. This is a very deep thought, and we're just getting warmed up. Okay, so fasten your seatbelts. We're revving up for what really appreciate why our lives are completely dependent on how we use our speech. The Pardes reminder of Moshe Cordovero, one of the greatest all-time Mekubalim, he writes, why did the Rebbeinu Shalom give us 32 teeth? He says, I know al pi Kabbalah, I know biologically, I know through dissection, I know through surgery, and you could research this on your own, that in the brain, there are 32 main pathways of Chachma that descend from the Mayach, each one connecting to a different tooth. So why would that be? There's a concept that there are 32 Nesivos HaChachma, 32 pathways of wisdom. And you could research this, it's quite fascinating. There are 32 main blood vessels that somehow connect from the Mayach to one's teeth. And the reason the Rebbeinu Shalom created us this way is because the person was created b'tselem Elokim, a person was created in the image of God. And God created the world, the Sefer HaYetzirah writes, B'lamed Beis Nesivos Chachma, with 32 pathways of wisdom. How do we know this? If you open up the first parak of Bereshis, Bereshis bara Elokim, Vayomer Elokim, Vayivra Elokim, Vayitzer Elokim. How many times does it say Elokim in the first parak of Bereshis? 32 times, to indicate that God created the world with 32 pathways of wisdom. That's why the Torah begins with a Beis and ends with a Lamed, to indicate all of creation, all of the Bria was created with these 32 pathways of wisdom. And since we are a microcosm of the universe and an image of Hashem Himself, so in our mind, so to speak, which is the Tselem Elokim, there are these 32 pathways of wisdom that connect to the 32 teeth to indicate that you better use your mouth properly. You have to use your mouth for Chachma, because each tooth is rooted on high to one of the sources of Chachma. And so to speak, if you use your mouth for something other than Chachma, for nonsense, you're basically causing the system to go haywire. And you're switching the circuit. And that's a dangerous thing for a person's life. But if a person's careful to make sure that the 32 pathways of wisdom descend into one's mouth, and one is true, and one uses their mouth for what the Rebbeinu Shalom created their Koyach HaDibur for, that is the secret to long life. Okay, with that introduction, let's begin the following journey. Every morning, I'll tell you a story. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about the bracha of Asher Yatzar. Over Pesach, I spoke I gave a short shiur about the bracha of Asher Yatzar. Somebody came over to me after the shiur, says, Rabbi Glatstein, about 10 years ago or so, Dayan Dunner at the Gula Convention, he got up in the main address, and people expect he's going to speak for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, he's going to give a fiery drasha. He opened up a siddur, and he read Asher Yatzar, and he translated the words, and then he sat down. And a lot of people found that very inspiring, and somebody came over to tell this to me. I said, okay, very good. How can you tell me? I said, he said, I don't want you to feel like you spoke about Asher Yatzar, and it's like, it's a simple thing to speak about. They spoke about it at the Agudah Convention. Fine. 2 minutes later, another guy comes over to me. He said, Rabbi Glatstein, did you hear? I'm like thinking, oh no, he's going to tell me what Dayan Dunner said at the Agudah Convention. So he tells me, Rabbi Glatstein, did you hear what Dayan Dunner said at the Agudah Convention? I said, yes, somebody just told me. But I have one postscript to the story. My father was there. He told me his name, I'm not going to say his name. My father was there at the Agudah Convention. And after Dayan Dunner spoke about the Asher Yatzar, my father said, that's what I came to New Jersey, that's what I schlepped here for. I schlepped here to hear the Taich of Asher Yatzar. I know that from 3rd grade. The next day he said his father lost the ability to take care of his functions. So he went to Gadol B'Yisrael. He said, what happened? He was a healthy man. So he goes, so tell me, around what time did this happen? And he told him the whole story. He said, you need to go ask for Mechila. You have to ask him for Mechila. He asked Dayan Dunner for Mechila and Hakol B'Seder. So they say, the Seder Hayom says that if somebody is Mechavein and says Asher Yatzar carefully, slowly, with Kavana, it's a skula, they shouldn't need the doctors. So I don't know, we won't, we'll use echo for, I don't know. For Ovdei Kochavim, yeah. But halavai, we should be able to do that. I want to talk for a few minutes about the bracha of Asher Yatzar. What's Asher Yatzar? We know it's the human being's most base, mundane function, and this is a bracha that we make when a person is able to take care of their bodily functions. But there's an interesting halacha that's not so well known, and really the Sidurim throw us off. Because there's another bracha, which is probably the antithesis of Asher Yatzar, which you could not find two more polar opposite brachas, and that is Alekai Neshama. Alekai Neshama, we're talking about the sanctity of the soul, how the soul is divine, how Hashem breathed the soul into our bodies, and how Hashem preserves it in us, and one day He's going to take it back, and then ultimately He's going to return it to us. Okay, so we have an Asher Yatzar, we have an Alekai Neshama. Don't be thrown off by your Sidurim. Asher Yatzar and Alekai Neshama, the Mishnah Berurah says, should go together. Even though in the Siddur they put Asher Yatzar, they put Birchas HaTorah, and they put Alekai Neshama, okay, the diavad, it's okay. My great grandfather was in Spain, so I have a little Sephardic blood. Yeah, but even in the Nusach Sfarad Sidurim, in the Nusach Ashkenaz Sidurim, Mishnah Berurah says l'chatchila you're supposed to juxtapose Asher Yatzar and Alekai Neshama. Why? Because Alekai Neshama doesn't start with a baruch. How can you just say Alekai Neshama should start to be Torah? When you say a bracha, you have to say Baruch Atah Hashem. There's no Baruch Atah Hashem, Alekai Neshama. So what you do is you fuse together Asher Yatzar and Alekai Neshama, and Alekai Neshama borrows the Baruch Atah Hashem from Asher Yatzar. So I have a question for you. Who in the world thought of this great idea to take an Asher Yatzar and to take an Alekai Neshama and to stick together the two most polar opposite brachas? Asher Yatzar is the lowliest function of man. Alekai Neshama is the divine quality of the soul. And we're going to fuse together these two brachas. But it's interesting. How does Asher Yatzar end? Baruch Atah Hashem roifei kol basar. Which is very appropriate for Asher Yatzar, because Asher Yatzar is about the physical creation of man. And it ends off roifei kol basar. But we add two words. Umafli la'asois. God acts wondrously. So now the question is, what's the great wonder? What is the greatest wonder that the Rebbeinu Shem ever created? What does it mean, umafli la'asos? What does umafli la'asos refer to? That means in these two words, umafli la'asos, it's capturing the greatest wonder that the Rebbeinu Shem was ever able to accomplish. What is a pella? What does pella mean in the Chumash? A few times we have the word pella. We have by nedarim. We have the words, how does the Torah say a nedar? Ish, ki, yafli. Right? Ish ki yafli. Or for example, the Rambam, when he talks about Hilchos Nadarim, Hilchos Shvuos, Hilchos Charamim, he categorizes it in a sefer called Hafla'ah. Pele often refers to the faculty of speech. What's going on over here? Let's ask another question. To be a Rebbe in Klal Yisrael, to be the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael, to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, what is the most important quality? So we could stand on the corner, we could ask 1,000,000 people, we could take a poll, and one person's going to say Avas Yisrael, and one person's going to say Anivos, and one person's going to say being a Talmid Chacham. But you can make the case, and probably this is correct, the most important quality to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, to be a Rebbe in Klal Yisrael, you need to speak clearly, because if you can't speak clearly, nobody knows what you're talking about. You can't mumble. You can't stutter. So it's Hafla Vafela, the greatest leader in the history of Klal Yisrael, who we know, first of all, was the greatest in every quality, every spiritual quality. The biggest Anaf, the biggest Navi, the biggest Rachaman, the biggest Moiser Nefesh. Not only that, even physically, Chazal say, he was the tallest, he was the strongest, he had every physical quality, except for the one most important quality needed to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, and that is, he couldn't get a word out of his mouth. What's Pshat in Moshe Rabbeinu? Why couldn't Moshe talk? Why did God create him that way? Let's talk about another interesting phenomenon. The Gemara tells us about the baby b'mei imai. Let's talk about the status of a child in his mother's uterus. Chazal say that the baby b'mei imai, his eyes are closed, the mouth is closed, all the holes are closed, and there's a candle on top of the baby's head, and an angel comes and teaches the baby Kol HaTorah Kula. So if you have a shaila, the best person to ask is if you could communicate with a child in utero, he'll know all the answers. Okay? And the Gemara says, Kivan sheyatza la'avir ha'olam. Once the child is born, all the openings close, all the sealed open. And a malach comes, v'satray al piv. The malach comes and hits the kid on his mouth. So what happens to the child? He forgets Kol HaTorah Kula. Did you ever think that this makes no sense? Why, when somebody would be hit on their mouth, would they forget the Torah? If the Gemara would say the malach comes and clobbers the baby over the head, and the baby forgets Kol HaTorah Kula, I would understand why the baby forgets the Torah, because the baby's in concussion protocol. But just because the malach came and hit the baby on the mouth, why would the child forget the Torah? What does the mouth have to do with the Torah? What do Chazal mean? Why does the malach hit the child on the mouth? Don't hit the child on the mouth. This way the child won't forget the Torah. Aaron HaKohen, when he served as a Kohen Gadol, he wore special begadim, right? He wore 8 priestly garments. There were 7 days before Aaron HaKohen was inaugurated that Moshe Rabbeinu was the presiding Kohen Gadol. He, so to speak, showed Aaron, he showed him the ropes. And the Gemara wants to know, these were the Shiva Simei HaMiluim. And the Gemara wants to know, what did Moshe wear during the Shiva Simei HaMiluim? What was he wearing? So the Gemara says, Beged Lavan, a white garment, She'ein La Imra, that had no, you know what the word Imra means? It had no hem. A kittel, right? It had no hem. Why can't it have a hem? Because they're going to accuse the rabbi was pocketing money while he was doing the Avodah. So therefore it could have no hem, right? Like they say, you can't take your money with you. That's why you wear the kittel. The kittel has no pockets. Beged Lavan She'ein La Imra, a white garment that has no hem. How do you say hem in Lashon HaKodesh? Imra. Isn't that interesting? How do you say hem in Lashon HaKodesh? Imra. Says the Maral, a davar nifla ad ma'od. This is the secret to understanding Koyach HaDibur. You have a body. If the body's not alive, the body can't talk. Behema can't talk. A guf cannot talk. A physical substance, a physical entity, has no capacity to speak. On the other hand, a neshama can't talk either. Neshama can't speak. It doesn't have the mouth, it doesn't have the tongue, it doesn't have the lips, it doesn't have the teeth. A neshama can't speak. So how does a human being talk? A body can't talk. A soul can't talk. So what's talking? Who's talking? How do we explain the phenomenon of speech? And the answer is we have to look carefully at a pasuk we've heard 1 billion times. And if we look carefully, we'll understand the secret of the faculty of speech. I could ask you for a moment to look at number 16. The Rebbeinu Shalom tells us that when He created Adam, Vayitzer Hashem Elokim Es ha'adam, and God created man, afar min ha'adama, dirt from the ground. That's the physical creation of man. Vayipach bi'apav nishmas chayim, and He blew in his nostril a living spirit. That's the neshama of man. So we have the physicality of man, we have the spirituality of man, and now when the two of them come together, vayehi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, man became a living spirit, says Targum Onkelos, the ruach memala, man gained the faculty of speech. Could the body speak? No. Could a soul speak? No. Speech is produced by the interface and the fusion of the body and the soul. In other words, we know this is a table. Very good. So the body is also like a table. It's a physical substance. We have a neshama. The fact that God could create a physical substance, we can't do it, but for Him it's not a big deal. The fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom could create a soul is also not a big deal. But the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom could create a connection and an interface between the body and the soul, how does Rebbeinu Shalom stick the soul and the body together? How do you connect a soul and a body? What's the glue? What's the tape? How do you piece together a guf and a neshama? The fusion of the body and the soul, the connection of the guf and the neshama, is what is called the Koyach HaDibur. The tape, the glue that connects the guf to the neshama is the faculty of speech. It's the one faculty in the human being that requires the physical phenomenon of the mouth and the tongue and the lips, and it also requires the seichel of the mind. The guf and the neshama are held together through the faculty of speech. The biggest pella, the biggest wonder of the Rebbeinu Shalom is that he's able to fuse together the guf and the neshama, and he does so through the faculty of speech. Every single time you see the word pella in Tanakh, it's a reference to Kayach HaDibur. How do you say neder? Ish kiyafli lindar neder. What does the Rambam refer to as Hilchos Nedarim? Sefer Hafla. Therefore, we have Asher Yatzar, which is the physical creation of man. We have Elokai Neshama, which is the Neshama of man. But how does Rebbeinu Shalom fuse together Asher Yatzar and Elokai Neshama with two words? Umafli la'asais, with the Kayach HaDibur. The Kayach HaDibur is the glue that holds together the Asher Yatzar to Elokai Neshama. And therefore, so long as a person is just a Neshama, though you could teach them the whole Torah and they'll remember it, they'll never forget anything. And that's why a baby, b'mei imai, you teach it the whole Torah and it remembers everything. You know why? Because it has no connection to its guf yet. The soul is like a free spirit. It has not been tethered to the body. Why hasn't it been tethered to the body? Because the baby can't talk. The malach comes and the malach hits the baby on the mouth. What does it mean? You know, in Hilchos Shabbos, what is it called when you give something the final touch? The sort of, you have a kli, you have a vessel, and it's unfinished, and then the artisan comes and gives it the final bang. What is that called? Makeh b'patish. When the malach comes and hits the baby, he's not trying to injure the baby. He's giving the baby the final touch of man. What's the final touch of man? Final touch of man is you have a guf, you have a neshama, but the final touch is what's going to fuse them together. The final touch is the Kayach HaDibur. The Malach comes as the agent of Hashem and he fuses together the guf to the neshama. The baby is now able to talk. The only problem is now the neshama is tethered to the guf. The guf pulls down the neshama and the baby forgets Kol HaTorah Kula. It's the connection to the guf that makes our soul not able to retain Torah. But there was one human being whose soul was so great and so lofty and so holy that soul was never really tethered to his guf. That soul was so lofty and so divine that it was never pulled down by the body. It never really fused properly with the body. The greatest man who ever lived, who never forgot any Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu. The only thing is, he didn't have a Kayach HaDibur. Because that Kayach HaDibur would have pulled him down. But once the Torah was given, Moshe Rabbeinu, through the power of Torah, was able to fuse together his neshama to his body, retain a Kayach HaDibur, and at the same time retain all of his learning. But what we are learning tonight is that the interface, the point of fusion of a person's guf to a person's neshama is the Kayach HaDibur. And therefore, guard it, as they say, like the apple of your eye. That is life. Kayach HaDibur is life. The person is careful with the words they say, how they say it. When they say it, they're literally guarding their soul. They're allowing the body and the soul to exist and coexist harmoniously in a perfect balance. But when a person begins to corrupt the Kayach HaDibur, that's the source of life. That's where life is preserved. So the story goes that when the Chofetz Chaim was 83 years old, so one of his Talmidim came to visit him. So the Chofetz Chaim was weak. He was laying down on the couch, and he comes to his student. And he says, "Do me a favor, come here." So the student said, "I'm here. I'm sitting right in front of you." So Chofetz Chaim, no, come really close. So the Talmud, he was holding his breath. What am I supposed to do? What does the Chofetz Chaim want from me? Chofetz Chaim opens up his mouth. He says, "Look in my mouth." So he's like, no. Go in. Get down in there. Look inside my mouth. So the guy, he was like nearly gonna faint. And then he said, "Count my teeth. Count my teeth." And he counted 32 snow white, pristine teeth like they would be the teeth of a little child. Chafetz Chaim said, my whole life I guarded my mouth, and the Ribbon Shalom guarded my mouth as well. But what we're learning is a little bit deeper. If we're careful to guard our mouths, then the Ribbon Shalom will guard our lives. The Ribbon Shalom will bestow on us Chayim, the source of life, the source of Chayim, the root of life, the ability for the neshama to stay here in this world. This is a very hostile world for the neshama. The neshama is not comfortable in Olam Hazeh. There's nothing in this world that gives the neshama satisfaction. The neshama is very uncomfortable here. We try to make the neshama happy. Everybody has this gnawing feeling, no, life is not enough. There's not enough. I need something more. Maybe a nicer this, a nicer that, but it's the neshama calling. The neshama is saying there's no currency in this Olam Hazeh that makes me happy. The neshama is very uncomfortable here. The only way to keep the neshama and the guf tethered together, is Natsar L'Shain Chameirah. So we've learned a few interesting things. The tongue is vertical. The tongue is used horizontal. Its default position is at rest. You use it if you must. It's guarded by the teeth. It's guarded by the lips. We have 32 teeth connected to the 32 byways of Chachma to indicate that we use our mouth for Chachma. Furthermore, we have 16 top teeth. The mouth is for Torah, is for Tefillah, is for Chesed. But most importantly, the guf alone is not able to speak. The neshama alone is not able to speak. Asher Yatzar alone is not a bracha. Elokai neshama alone is not a bracha. The way these two brachas fuse together are through the two words, umafli la'asos. That's the greatest pella, that's the greatest wonder. The Rebbe Shem should give us all siyata d'shmaya, to be able to use our words, our mouths, our tongue, our teeth properly. The Rebbe Shem should watch over all of us. We should always come together for Limanat Torah, Simchas and all of your families. Thank you so much for listening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.